Excellent. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session, the 50-liter homes and the future of urban water and energy. My name is Alex Mung, Head of Water and Environmental Resilience at the World Economic Forum, a core partner of the 50-liter home coalition. I will be one of the two moderators for this session and delighted to be joining you here today. The first part of business, just a little bit of housekeeping. Delighted to see everyone here, though for everyone's benefit, perhaps if we may ask everyone just to be aware that this session is being recorded and to please mute yourself when you're not speaking. We do encourage you to use the chat function in the in Zoom to post your questions for our great session and panel today. And the slides and the recording will be made available for everyone following this session. Next slide, please. The purpose of this session really is to introduce everyone to the 50-liter home coalition. We want to seek your feedback and engagement as we move forward to its official launch later on this year. While we might not have a time for all of the questions, we certainly do encourage you to post the questions and encourage you to reach out and engage with us. During the session, I'll quickly turn over to my co-moderator, Tom Williams, the Water Director at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, who will help us take us through our moderated panel, which you'll see the panelists in the next slide. We've got a pretty good lineup for you today. We'll hear from other core partners of the 50-liter home coalition. We have Ratish Nambutiri from Kohler, John Friedman from Suez, and Karen Kirshnak from the 2030 Water Resources Group. And in the context of their experience in Cape Town and dealing with a day zero scenario, we have Xanthia from the city of Cape Town. Really exciting here today. Next slide, just to give you a little bit of context in terms of why 50-liter homes. Here at the World Economic Forum, we publish our global risk report every year, where water for the past 9 consecutive years remains at the very top, in the top 5 in terms of impact. While it's interesting and it's a good thing that water remains at the top of mind of many decision makers, it's also a signal, unfortunately, that we haven't done enough as the broader sort of water community to knock it off the list yet. While other issues have come and gone, while we see financial crises and other areas that have popped on the list but have also dropped, water remains within the top 5, signaling its systemic nature and the need for collaboration across stakeholders. What's also is very interesting is the link to other top risks in the report. We see it's linked to extreme weather, biodiversity loss, climate change. Water, for example, is responsible for a significant portion of energy consumption in the home. And in today's context, of course, water is linked to health issues. COVID virus is highlighting the intrinsic link with water and health. Next slide, please. As we see in this slide, the stress is mounting in cities worldwide. Where already over half of us live in cities, and over 2/3 of the population will live in cities and urban hubs by 2050. Water stress is increasing here. 14 of the 20 of the world's largest cities are already experiencing water scarcity, and the list of cities continues to grow. Again, as I mentioned, in Cape Town in 2017-2018, we had a day zero scenario, and that list continues to grow. We've seen Chennai in India as another city that has experienced extreme distress, and the list will continue to grow unless there is innovation in the way that we plan for and invest in and design cities, the way that we have different products, the way that we work together. Next slide, please. So where's all the upside to this? Where's the good news? The good news is it can be done. As we see here with Cape Town, responding to the threat of a day zero scenario, managed to reduce its water use on a per capita basis per person on a daily basis to 50 liters per day. Now, this is a fraction of what many other cities and other regions around the world are experiencing and use. So the good news is it can be done. It was tough. Ask any Cape Townian. It was tough, but it is possible. So that brings the question of, well, as water scarcity mounts around the world, and in particular many of the cities, and if it is possible, why couldn't this become the norm, the 50 liters? As we see in the next slide, why couldn't 50 liters feel like 500 through innovation, through new products, but also the way that we look at cities, the way we work together, that this 50 liters becomes the norm and actually it doesn't feel like it's a burden to us. It doesn't sacrifice in quality of life, whether we are in developing or developed countries. And why couldn't together, through a number of our partners and organizations, why couldn't we actually make this a reality? And that is the context in which the 50 Liter Home Coalition was born. From here, I will actually turn over to my co-moderator, Tom Williams of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, to help us moderate the panel and get perspectives from our core partners. And from their perspective, where we're headed, the ambition and the activities and the vision of this, and to introduce you the 50 Liter Home Coalition. Tom, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Alex, for setting the scene. And I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes giving a brief overview of the 50 Liter Home Coalition before we move into the panel discussion to hear from various stakeholders and their perspectives. The 50 Liter Home Coalition is a multi-stakeholder platform which is addressing urban water security. And the way it's doing this is through innovations in the laundry, in the bathroom, and in the kitchen. And it's not just about water, it's about energy as well. When you consider that a significant proportion of energy consumption in the built environment is related to water use. What we're also hoping to do through the 50 Liter Home Coalition is to really enable lifestyle choices. So when somebody changes their behaviors in terms of how they use water in their home, we're hoping that this resonates beyond the household and impacts lifestyle choices to lead to sustainable water use. The 4 pillars of the coalition are innovation, education, implementation, and policy and regulation. And we work across these 4 pillars in 2 dimensions, globally, to develop this global coalition where we can advocate for some of the key messages, but quite uniquely, locally. An important feature of the coalition is that we will initiate pilots in particular geographies. So certain innovations that are being developed by the coalition members will be tested on the ground in water scarce environments. I'll provide some further information at the end of today's session about how you can engage, but we're going to move on now to the panel discussion, and we're going to have the perspectives of various stakeholders on the value proposition of the coalition. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and ask our panelists to turn on your videos. So we have Ratish, we have John, we have Karen, and we have Xanthia. So I want to start the panel discussion with you, Ratish. Water efficiency in the home is something that COLA have been committed to for some time. So tell us about some of the progress you have seen in this space and where collectively we need to focus our efforts as part of the coalition.
Yeah, for sure. Tom, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear.
Great, thanks. So thanks for that intro, Tom and Alex. A little bit about myself. I am part of the Kohler Company Innovation for Good and Sustainability team, and excited to be here today. And a quick intro on the company for those of us that don't know. Kohler is a global brand and a leading manufacturer of kitchen and bath products, power systems, and also high-end hospitality businesses. And since we're in the business of, we're best known for our plumbing brands, which really includes products like sinks, faucets, toilets, bathtubs, and water purification systems. To Tom's question about the progress that we've made so far, so Kohler has been a leader in water efficiency for decades now. We were one of the early partners of the US EPA's WaterSense program, and won their awards for 10 consecutive years. And we have, I want to say, several hundred products in our portfolio that are certified to carry the WaterSense label. In addition to water efficiency, we recently also completed a project with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as part of the Reinvent the Toilet Challenge, where we conducted some extensive research in residential water and wastewater management outside the home. And we are really looking forward to applying those insights back into the 50-liter home project. So in summary, and unfortunately my friends from P&G and Electrolux are not here today, but I would submit that they would agree that the work that has been done so far across all of our companies from an innovation perspective has been focused primarily on water efficiency and driving reduction in water use. But let's talk about what's ahead of us and where the opportunity for innovation is. Really quickly, I want to ground us all on the problem that Alex had shown in one of his slides. So the average US indoor water use today is approximately 220 liters per person per day. And if you look at a home that is using WaterSense toilets, WaterSense shower heads, WaterSense faucets, and Energy Star rated laundry machines, we could bring the consumption down to about 130 liters per person per day. So the good news is we could get almost halfway from where we are today just by using products that are in the market. That's good. But how do we get to the other half, right? And that's where we need to think about a much broader approach. And it presents an opportunity for innovation in, I want to say 3 specific areas. So I'll touch on that really quickly. First one being water reuse. So as Tom was talking about 50 liters being irresistible and wanting to feel like 500 liters, it's important that we offer that irresistible consumer experience. And while water efficiency and reduction in water use is a key component, we really need to think about augmenting that with some sort of a water reuse strategy and water management strategy inside the home that really helps the consumer preserve that experience, but yet save water. The second opportunity is going to be to focus on reducing energy consumption. One of the things about carbon accounting is one of the key contributors to greenhouse gas emissions within a home is the energy required to heat water. So 50-liter home really presents a significant opportunity to drive innovation in that area, to reduce that energy, but also drive meaningful value to the consumer that way. And then finally, the third opportunity I want to highlight is really integration of smarts, smart fixtures, intelligent devices across the kitchen and bathroom spaces that really help enable and empower the consumer to modulate the quantity of water, the temperature of water, et cetera, so that they can, again, preserve the experience and make it feel like 500 liters, but also not compromise on water and energy use. So in summary, I really feel that this is an audacious goal, but I think we can make it happen. I think if we collectively work together across sectors and involve corporations like ourselves, but also bring in folks like large NGOs, policymakers, utilities, water and wastewater companies like Suez, it's going to be, it's something that we could actually achieve over a period of time. So we're excited to be here and looking forward to where this is going to take us.
Great, thanks a lot, Ratish. And if our audience have any questions, please do use the chat function. I'll try to get a couple of questions to the panelists as we move along. So Ratish focused there on some of the work that's been going on inside the home from Kohler, and we heard about some of the other coalition partners like P&G and Electrolux. John, I want to move to you next, and you're representing Suez. So, what goes on inside the home as it relates to water efficiency has implications for outside the home, the whole urban water system, for example. So what do we need to do to adapt to this 50-liter home paradigm outside the home?
Great question, and thanks for having me, Tom. And also, it's great to be part of Stockholm World Water Week, and I've been going for more than a dozen years, and can't wait till we can all go in person again. What a wonderful meeting and a wonderful place. I am with Suez. I'm the global government affairs leader based in Washington, D.C., and Suez is one of the world's leading water treatment and waste management companies. We have 90,000 employees in 120 countries. And from a water treatment standpoint, we operate 3,400 drinking water and wastewater treatment plants in 70 countries serving 100 million people. We also make virtually every type of water treatment technology imaginable, particularly in the reuse field. And we're focused on reuse in part because of what Tom mentioned. With World Economic Forum has identified water scarcity as one of the leading risks the world is facing, and reuse is really one of the principal ways you can help mitigate that risk. In other words, instead of taking wastewater and discharging it untreated or partially treated into oceans and rivers, you actually treat it to such an extent that you can reuse it for agriculture. And I saw somebody asked a question about agriculture online. We're running power plants or even at the household level. And Tom, one of the basic building blocks for our reuse projects all around the world is called the membrane bioreactor. And that's what we would use for the 50-liter home. And it gives you the ability to take the wastewater from the home and treat it so that actually you're using biological processes and membranes to physically separate the H2O molecules from the waste, the part you want to leave behind. So you have water that's perfect to use for any household purpose. Now, what's the impact on the greater urban network if you are reusing water at the residential level? Well, there are two impacts. First is economic. In other words, if you speak to the general manager of a municipal wastewater agency and say, hey, we're going to reduce the flows that are coming to your system, they're thinking, well, hey, we're sized for a certain level of flow, and now we're going to lose revenue, and how are we going to be able to operate our system? And then the second impact is simply physical. In other words, you need to ensure there's enough flow through the collection network to get all the way to the centralized treatment plant. And when you reduce the flows, you have to maintain what's known as scouring velocity. For a greenfield project, you can design it in a way that you have adequate scouring velocity. And if it's a brownfield project, you can make the necessary changes too, like adding a pump station. So it's all manageable.
Great, thanks, John. We'll come back to you a little bit later on for some more questions, and I think we're going to touch on this reuse issue again. But first of all, I'd like to move on to Karen. And already from the interventions, Karen, we're seeing some unusual partnerships between, Kohler, which focuses on toilets, taps and faucets, companies like Suez, which are involved in operating large urban water systems, for example. And a critical part of the coalition will be piloting with multi-stakeholder collaborations like this. Now, 2030 Water Resources Group has some fantastic experience and track record in facilitating multi-stakeholder platforms. So what do you see as the key enabling factors that will make 50-litre home pilots successful within those contexts?
Great, thank you, Tom. Can you hear me okay? Great, okay. So welcome, and I'm so glad to be part of this. As John, also with a virtual Stockholm Water Week, really thrilled to be here and glad we can continue in this way. So, I think as the panelists have mentioned, we really need to look at new ways of managing water, and especially in light of COVID-19 and the longer term repercussions, certainly, that are ahead of us. Many maybe that we don't even still know. So 2030 WRG, as you mentioned, so we were founded on the principle, in essence, if I can put it this way, that there's not any one institution that's going to ride in on a white horse and solve our water problems. And as Alex mentioned in the slide around water crises being in the global risks, again, it's not one institution that's going to come in and take that off that list. It really requires a collective action approach of getting governments, private sector, and civil society working together to look at these issues in a collective way. So 2030 WRG, the model, what we've done is to create structured multi-stakeholder platforms. So we have MSPs, as we call them, multi-stakeholder platforms in 14 countries across Asia, Latin America, and Africa. So we have this model. We used what we call ACT, which is our Analyze, Convene, and Transform approach, which is around getting robust analysis and consultative dialogues to really bring about transformative impact. And what's, I think, central, and I already coming up in this discussion, is the importance of innovation, right? If we're going to look at these issues and the challenges ahead of us, we need to innovate more. But not just from a technology standpoint, but also from an institutional standpoint. So multi-stakeholder platforms provide that mechanism to really bring in technical innovations, but also policy innovations. And this is where 2030 WRG, through our multi-stakeholder platforms, is really driving, and we see with the 50-Liter Home Coalition, a way to change how we look at urban water and energy issues. So for 2030 WRG, you know, in terms of partnering here, we see, you know, the ability to use our existing structured multi-stakeholder platforms to help in pilot testing. Certainly that model is already there, as I described, in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. But also in places where it doesn't exist, is using our knowledge on how to create these structured multi-stakeholder approaches so that governments, private sector, and civil society all really feel a part of the effort. You know, it's not the issues that have been described here, and even the ones coming ahead for us in the coming decade, really do require that everybody feel part of the process. So in terms of answering your question, I would say the key enabling factor for the piloting as we move into this through the 50-Liter Home Coalition is really a collective action mentality. You know, it's again, government, private sector, and civil society feeling like we can all win this together, and we can all share the credit, right? And get away from this mindset that there's one institution that has to get all the credit, or will solve all the problems on their own. So I would say that's a key enabling factor that, you know, I think we've seen that evolving over the last few decades, certainly, but I think still needs to be done much more, especially if you look at SDG 17 in terms of partnerships. There's a lot been done there, but again, how do we bring that mentality across the institutions? For the private sector, I think this is key in terms of looking at it from pre-competitive space, right? The mindset that through innovation, it will benefit everyone. And so that, I think, is really important. From government side, I think it's a willingness to trust in innovation and support scaling efforts, right? It'll be one thing to pilot, but then how do we scale from there? And that includes financial aspects, policy reforms, perhaps new regulations and standards will be needed, and an overall new approach to urban development. And then for our civil society, also, I think a willingness to contribute collectively and also build more of the awareness raising that is needed for this type of transformation. So I think just to conclude, so we have more time for some Q&A, is I think what we see with the multi-stakeholder platforms, it provides a safe space to test and innovate and then scale up from there. It'll also provide a space for learning, which I think will be really important here with the 50-Liter Home Coalition. So what we think is really important is a really systems transformation, and that is an overall mindset and willingness across all the institutions and stakeholders to drive and innovate together. You know, we will have failures. We have to be honest about that, but we can learn from those failures and build on them collectively. And that, I think, is a key enabling factor that we need to keep in mind.
Great, thank you very much, Karen, and we'll come back to you with some questions soon. But let's move on to Xanthia. And Xanthia, you're sitting there in Cape Town. I think all of us on the call heard about Day Zero situation in 2017. And as you move forward in Cape Town and develop your new water strategy, as you hear about the 50-Liter Home Coalition and some of the panelists' interventions, what resonates with you with a city like Cape Town as you're looking forward now and developing your water strategy?
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you once again for the opportunity. In reflecting on what has been shared and heard by the other panel members and how that resonates with Cape Town, I would like to take a moment maybe just to share our drought story, because I think it will become evident where there is synergy in what has been shared to date in the discussion. So as all of you may know, Cape Town has over the past few years been in the grip of the most severe and protracted drought in the city's recorded history. Scientists have classified this as a 1 in 590 year event. And 2 years ago, when the possibility of a day zero for Cape Town was announced, dam levels were at 25% and bottomed out at 19% before receiving some rainfall during winter of 2018. This was just 7% above the level at which we would have started to restricting consumption to 25 litres per person per day. And through a combination of enormous efforts by our residents to reduce water consumption, adopting and adapting to a 50-litre way of life, commerce and industry investing in enhanced water efficiencies, and a range of interventions by the city administration, including intensive pressure management, restructuring of our water tariffs and water augmentation schemes, as well as amending our water bylaw to enhance water efficiencies within the household. We pulled through the worst of it all without ever having to turn off taps and implement the day zero scenario. And residents reduced consumption by almost 60% in world record breaking time, resulting in Cape Town being formally acknowledged by the World Water Association and recognized as the global water saving capital. And we did, however, have in our favor our pre-existing water demand management strategy, which I believe assisted us with our ability to rapidly respond to the drought. Cape Town, prior to the severe drought, had the lowest water use per capita than any other metropolitan municipality in South Africa. And prior to the drought, Day Zero announcement, which put Cape Town's water story on the global map, the city had already halved its consumption rate from 1.2 billion litres per day to 600 million litres per day. And so the very well-established water conscious ways of our residents were ramped up through behavioral messaging, sustained communication and awareness over multiple communication platforms. And we generated very specialized campaigns such as Think Water, Save Like a Local, which was targeted at tourists, and because Cape Town's economy is very dependent on our tourism sector. We also developed Together We Can Beat the Drought, Together We Can Avoid Day Zero, 50 litres a day keeps Day Zero away, the 50-litre life. All of these elements contributed to a community-orientated response to the drought. The city obviously had its advanced pressure management program, which alone achieved a saving of approximately 2.6 billion litres of water in a single year. We have our pipe replacement program, which also assisted with reducing pipe bursts, and ultimately that has assisted with saving water. Our leak detection teams, which operated and went from suburb to suburb detecting underground leaks. We also increased the number of water inspectors and water response teams to ensure that we were rapidly responding to any water-related faults. And the lessons learned during this challenging time were incredibly valuable, and the city remains committed to ensuring that the momentum of these learnings are not lost and that it forms the foundation for our journey towards greater sustainability and resilience. And I think the silver lining to any crisis is the corresponding emergence of innovation, where you are forced to think differently and to find solutions. And so through the assistance of expertise and multiple inputs from different stakeholders and partners, our water strategy was developed and approved last year by our City Council. And this is not only a strategy document, but really a commitment to our residents with clearly set out timeframes and budgets to ensure the necessary implementation. The strategy is a very long-term plan with very ambitious objectives, and it aims to guide Cape Town towards becoming a water resilient city by 2030 and achieve water sensitive city status by 2040. And essentially a water sensitive city is one that is resilient, livable, productive, and sustainable. And in a water sensitive city, we interact with the urban water cycle in ways that provide water security through efficient use of diverse available resources, which enhance and protect the health of our waterways, wetlands, and coast and mitigate flood risk and damage and create public spaces that collect and clean recyclable water. And so in order to achieve the very ambitious objectives and the vision of our water strategy, we've set 5 commitments, and those include 1, safe access to water and sanitation. And this is about ensuring that we facilitate safe access to basic water and sanitation for all of our residents, but particularly those in informal settlements. The second commitment is about being water wise and promoting wise use of water to all users within our city through price regulations and public education campaigns and ongoing water demand management and pressure management. And the third commitment is about sufficient and reliable water. And this is about the importance of diversifying our water resources and not only being reliant on surface water through rainfall. And the fourth commitment is about a shared benefit where we work with key stakeholders within the entire system to ensure economic, social, and environmental benefits that come from our shared water resource. And then the fifth objective or commitment is about being water sensitive, which I've already elaborated on. Because essentially we believe that a city that safeguards itself against water risks is characterized by shared accountability. And through partnerships, we believe that we can maximize on our shared water resource. At the same time, we need to ensure that our focus on behavioral change and attitudes to water and demand management does not let up. As demand for water grows, it is not only diversification of supply that is required to address future risks, but also sustained campaign to entrench the behavioral changes we have seen over the past few years. We know that the world is still watching Cape Town and is keenly waiting to see how lessons are translated into action. While we have achieved a lot with a number of our augmentation schemes coming online, there is still a long way to go, and we'd like to continue sharing our journey, because I think that the sooner we as a global community recognize that we are equally vulnerable to uncertain climate future, and then that way we can become better prepared. Urban water resilience does imply that the capacity to anticipate, absorb, adapt, and respond and learn from shocks and stresses to protect public health and well-being are crucial. And we need to ensure that we rapidly respond and capacitate municipalities to be far more prepared for the benefit of all of our users of our city, our natural environment, and to ensure that we minimize economic disruption.
Fantastic, thank you, Xanthi. And I think you've really grounded some of the concepts that we've introduced here within a urban water strategy. So there's nothing like testing some of our assumptions and our approaches with a city that has gone and continues to go through some of these challenges. I want to address some of the questions that we have come in from participants and really zone in on this reuse. And we had a question from Jonas, which was talking about collective solutions for water reuse outside the home. I want to expand that and look at the inside of the home as well. So I want to go to Ratish and to John on this question of reuse. We've talked and heard about some of the technology advancements that enable reuse, but some of the collective action pieces, so standards, regulations, consumer behavior, for example. Ratish, starting with you at Kohler, I mean, this is something I assume you've explored. Now, what are the key levers from your perspective in terms of collective action for reuse as it relates to some of your stakeholders that you engage with?
Yeah, Tom, that's a great question. I think the water reuse is, I mean, it's not the first time the industry is looking at water reuse. You know, it has been explored in the past. But what we need to be thinking about is really engaging the right stakeholders in a meaningful way to enable and adopt or drive the adoption of water reuse. So like Karen was mentioning earlier, I think there's certainly a technology innovation piece, but there is a policy innovation element that needs to be thought about. There, you know, are there incentives? Are there rebates? Are there things that can be offered to really reward and incentivize consumers for adopting solutions like this? And then I think there's also the opportunity to drive consumer behavior. Water generally isn't expensive, right? We all tend to take water for granted as much as it's scarce and not available and all that. So how do we really make the invisible more visible, right? So how do we bring in the likes of smart technology and things like that to really give the consumer the ability to really empower them to take control of how they use their water fixtures and their appliances, and think about maintaining that experience, but also being conscious and conscientious of how much water they use. And then I think finally there is the opportunity to think about what else do we need to do? What are some key value drivers from a consumer adoption perspective outside of water pricing or incentivization or other things? What are other key value drivers that the 50-liter home can offer so that it becomes a consumer pull and not so much a water supply and demand issue? So, to me, that becomes a big driver of scale, is how do we make it, quote unquote, irresistible, and really give the consumer an opportunity to drive user behavior change because of the solutions and the value that the 50-liter home offers. So I think the defining what that key value drivers will be for a 50-liter home is important, and I know the coalition is working hard to define that.
Thanks, Ratish. John, anything to add to that?
Well, first of all, that was a great overview, Ratish. And I would just say that, Tom, the technology more or less exists to achieve, 50 liters of use a day per household. But what's missing, and Karen, you kind of said this during your remarks, is kind of the policy innovation. I think you used that term. And I really think you need to engage with governments and ask them to do four main things. And I think Ratish probably touched on most of these, but first is education and outreach. In other words, explain to people it's not only very important to reuse water, but it's totally safe to do so. And that's a big kind of threshold issue. Second, you need to remove barriers. And I think one of the principal barriers is the low price of water. Maybe not everywhere, but almost everywhere. It makes it hard to implement technologies that actually cost money when water can be almost free or almost free. Third, I think you need incentives. And if you think about piloting this in a place like Los Angeles, I do think you can get incentives at the regional or local level because the water scarcity is such an acute challenge. And Cynthia, you mentioned that Cape Town came out of I guess its worst drought in the past 500 years a year ago. So did Los Angeles. And so there is interest in taking pressure off municipal water supplies, and that next marginal dollar that these municipalities have to spend to create more water for people, it's cheaper for them to provide incentives than spend that next dollar. And then the fourth thing is you need clear regulations, and that I think is missing in a lot of places. In other words, you need to be able to say what level of treatment is required to reuse the water at the household level, where it's not necessarily being treated, monitored by a trained professional at a centralized treatment plant, right? So that's kind of, I think, Ratish, what you were talking about, you need these digital technologies deployed. But anyway, if you engage in those four and pull those four policy levers, that will be the game changer that will allow this 50-liter home to be deployed at maximum impact.
Great, thank you very much, John. And I want to go back to the first question we had asked by the audience. So Dick Bauman asked why emphasize home use when the water footprint of agriculture is 80% of water use. Maybe Karen, I can turn to you because 2030 Water Resources Group within its multi-stakeholder platforms look at agricultural use, looks at urban use, and looks at industry use. Can you talk a little bit about how this complements some of the other initiatives and why this is the focus of this coalition is important?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Tom, and thank you for that question. Absolutely, yes. I mean, agriculture, when it comes to water use, is 80% or so. But I think where here that is driving innovation in we're focusing around urban, but I think ultimately where it'll help create bridges across rural and urban, right? What we've seen with our 23 WRG multi-stakeholder platforms and the stakeholders that are involved in the multi-stakeholder platforms, we tend to have work streams that are focused on agriculture and water. We have around urban water management, industrial water management, in some countries mining and water management. So there is that tendency to go into those areas that are particularly provide that focus area. But then where I think the evolution of a lot of the initiatives, and we see this even with the 50 Liter Home Coalition, as you see the complementarity is also creating those bridges across those areas. And I think John brought this up, particularly around the reuse question. We see this in the multi-stakeholder platforms that we're supporting in terms of this question of reuse for municipal purposes, industrial purposes, and agricultural purposes, right? So I wouldn't say here's the emphasis. I think what the coalition has been able to do is bring together partners to look at this issue in a new way that will then create bridges across the different stakeholder groups. I think one thing here that is really important is the engagement with cities. And we certainly as 23 WRG want to work more closely with cities and using the multi-stakeholder platform approach, both within the city context, but also those city national dynamics. And again, as I said, that rural and urban dynamics, right? So I think there's a lot of ability here to innovate from the technical side, but certainly where the policy is where we see a lot of the barriers, especially around reuse for agricultural purposes. So I think this will come in through the innovation of the coalition as we shape and learn through the pilots. And I see that kind of that bridge between the urban and rural divides that we've had for so long. Here is that opportunity also to innovate into that sphere.
Great, thanks, Karen. And I want to throw the panelists one last question, but I'm going to ask you to do 30-second responses if you can. I'll give you a bit of breathing space to do that. But the final question is sort of a who, what, and how. And answer one of these or all three if you have the time. So to make the 50 Liter Home Coalition a success, who are the key stakeholders that we need to be engaging with? What are the systemic changes that we need to see happen? And how will we achieve impact at scale? So I'll give you a couple of seconds just to think about that. I did want to respond to another question that came into the chat, which talked about the implications on the sewerage system of 50 Liter Home. What's interesting is that we are already testing some of these concepts in China. This is through a WBCSD project, which Suez, P&G, Arcadis, and public sector authorities in China are engaged with. And with the thanks of Suez, we've been doing some quite fancy modeling work, which looks at a district level and the implications on both the water supply network and the sewerage network of moving to a 50 Liter home. So all of these questions, we're actually on the ground looking at them in specific situations at the moment, and hope to do more as the pilots come off the ground. Okay, so I want to come back to this who, what, how question. Please be quick with your responses. And Ratish, I'll start with you.
Sure, Tom. So I'll take the what piece. I think one of the systemic things that we need to really think about driving change about is policy. And in a way that really helps and enables reuse, right? So fit for purpose water is something that we've been tossing around within the coalition. How do we define, regulatory frameworks that really allow and enable consumers to treat water just to the level that's required to use it for the right application? So I think that's an area that we need to think about driving change in. Sorry, it took a little more than 30 seconds.
Great, Ratish. John, over to you.
Tom, like I said a few minutes ago, it's not a technology challenge, it's a policy challenge. And I'll take the who part of the question and say we need to engage with policymakers and to do all the things Ratish just said. We need to get them to put in place incentives and clear regulations.
Fantastic. Karen, over to you.
I would say I'd reinforce on the who. And as 23 WRG, we always say government, private sector, civil society. Certainly academia is important as well in terms of new research and innovations. But absolutely, I think all of the stakeholders need to be together and sharing and learning from each other as we go through these pilots and really try to transform kind of better water management across all of the sectors as we move toward the SDGs in 2030. And hopefully we'll be in a better place then.
Fantastic, Karen. And last but not least, Anthea, over to you.
In the case of Cape Town, we're part of what is called the Western Cape Water Supply System. So there are multiple users within our region, other than just our residents. So partnerships are key, and those are going to be challenging to all manage, but it is critical for our broader success. Cost, innovation, regulation, all key to the overall journey of ensuring we build a far more water secure future. And essentially through a focused implementation, because I think that's what it comes down to, a willingness to implement shared plans for the benefit of all users within the system that make use of the shared resource. And often we have the plans, we have policies, but there's a lack of willingness to see through the implementation part of it. So I think those aspects are critical.
Excellent, thank you very much, Xanthia. So now, how to engage. You've heard about some of these stakeholders that we are or want to engage with more. We want to engage with cities and also their water supply and wastewater operators. We want to engage with the private sector companies, those that are enabling low carbon water smart lifestyles, innovators, and also civil society groups and consumer networks. We've heard the importance of all of these different stakeholders and we seek their engagement in the coalition. How can you engage? You can join the leadership group. This really helps to form the strategic direction of the coalition. You can pitch in and learn about some of the innovation space that is being developed and also the piloting that will be initiated next year. And lastly, you can feel free to proactively engage in the network, whether that's at a global level or at a specific pilot level. We are getting ready to launch the network, the coalition publicly at the end of October. We'll be sending further information about the launch activities in the months ahead. Do look out for information online. The website you see there is currently in development. However, the email address is active. So if you have any questions, if you want to engage in the 50 Litre Home Coalition, please pop us a line. And as I mentioned, look out for some events in the next couple of months leading up to the launch of the coalition at the end of October. So we've just about run out of time. I'd like to thank our speakers. So starting at the top, we had Alex from WWWeek. Our panelists, we had Ratish, we had John, Karen, and Xanthia. Thank you to those of you who attended and posted questions. We'll be sharing both the slides and the video. And please come and see one of our activities in the next few weeks leading up to the launch. So that's it for now. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the World Water Week.